So I was scrolling on TikTok yesterday, which was probably my first mistake, but I stumbled across a video where the creator, who shall not be named, although I'd love to name and shame them, was basically just having a pop at handmade business owners and the fact that we don't take our businesses seriously. And everything that she was saying came from the standpoint of someone who worked in corporate business. For most of you, you'll be like, oh, say no more. However, some of you might be thinking, okay, well, what did she say? Well, the point is the fact that she was coming from a very different kind of business background with that point of view, and she was talking about handmade business. That in itself tells us everything about how wrong she was. Her overall argument was about the fact that we weren't ambitious enough, and we weren't constantly looking for, I'm trying to think of the words that she used. It was essentially, and I'm paraphrasing, the fact that we were settling in her eyes. We weren't, chasing isn't the word that she was using, but I'm quite tired, so chasing is the word I'm going to use. She was saying that we weren't chasing growth and increased revenue, etc. And I was watching this video and I jumped straight into the comments because I was like, surely people explain to her why this is the case. Yeah, they got her told. I was able to leave that video going, you know what, I don't need to add anything to this conversation. It's just been said 1,000 times. But I thought I would talk about it today because it is something that crops up, and I made a video similar to this about 2 years ago where I was talking about not everybody wanting a six-figure business. There was a time when it seemed like handmade business owners were trying to go for the 6 figures so that they could say they were a 6-figure business, because that was sort of the flex at the time. That was the metric of success. And I just remember thinking, most people who start a handmade business want something more than just 6 figures or constantly increasing revenue, because that is a very corporate business thing. It's not a business model that works well for usually a one-person handmade business. But you know, I'm going to try really hard to make this podcast not ranty. So let's get on with the intro, because I think I've been talking for, well, my camera's telling me 3 minutes and I still haven't done the intro. Hello, I'm Kim. Hopefully most of you will know me by now, but if you don't, that is my name, and what you've stumbled on here is the Coffee and Craft podcast, and it's me just chatting about various topics to do with running a handmade business. And the angle that I'm going to approach this topic this time is from the fact that, if I'm being brutally honest, I kind of shared this opinion when I started my handmade business. Not knowingly and not willingly, but it was almost internalized. I was applying a lot of the beliefs about what it meant to be successful and how I had to approach work from all of my experience working in the corporate world, and then applying that to running a handmade business. And it just didn't translate. It took me a little while and I had to unpick a lot of stuff. But once my mindset shifted, my business it was transformed. Everything changed for me, because I realised, oh, that's that, and this is this. Now, personally, I think it's kind of obvious to say that a corporate business is different to running a handmade business. I feel like that should be obvious to everyone on both sides, but apparently not. There's obvious differences. Usually corporate businesses are much bigger. I mean, handmade businesses can be a one-person show, with that one person literally doing everything, and if there's a gap in their skill set, they have to try and teach themselves how to do that skill so that they can fill that void. Whereas a corporate business will usually have teams, or at the very least, people. So you have obvious differences like that. But they are different business models, they have different goals, they have different methods of tracking the progress of those goals, different success metrics, and with a handmade business, it really comes down to the person running it. The person is the business, and their reason for creating one is going to determine what's considered success and not success. Unsuccessful. Words are difficult already. This is going to be a tricky podcast. For example, my personal goals in starting my business was to make a certain amount and to have freedom and flexibility of time. I've spoken about this before. I wanted to be present when my daughter needed me, and I didn't want to have to try and scrabble about to try and find childcare during school holidays for her. I wanted her at home. She wanted to be at home. She didn't want to go to after school clubs or holiday clubs or all of those things. So that was a huge driving force behind me starting my business. It still is. She's much older now, but she still isn't old enough to be left on her own, and I don't want to just shunt her on her own. So the whole flexibility of time is still a huge deal. And the set amount that I want to make, that has changed since I started my business. With the global economy being what it is, it's increased a fair bit, but it's still very small compared to a lot of people. And the not wanting to have a six-figure business or anything like that is still very, very strong, because I feel like sometimes that kind of a goal is very much linked to internalized corporate BS. The amount of work and sacrifice that would be needed in order to get something like that would mean having to say no to things that I currently want, like the flexibility of time, like being able to do everything myself, like spending as much time as I currently spend with my daughter. I would have to change that in order to get a six-figure business. So saying yes to one thing means saying no to something else, and vice versa. So I think a lot of people forget that the reason why so many people want a handmade business is because it's a way to create a business around them and what they want and what they find important, whereas a corporate business can be very rigid and often doesn't offer what you need. So hopefully you can see why I got so rattled when I saw this woman being so judgmental about people not being ambitious enough. That the lack of ambition was a huge thing, which actually reminded me, I'm going off on one now, but it actually reminded me of something that a previous boss said to me was, and they kind of said it a bit tongue-in-cheek, but there was, truth in jest when he said it, and it was that I needed to be more ambitious. And I just laughed, because I remember thinking at the time, oh, if only you knew, because I was extremely ambitious, just not with that job. In the background, I was busy creating what has now become my business, but it was in the very, very baby stages at the time with just my Etsy shop, and I didn't bother explaining it to them because they would have been like, oh, you and your cute Etsy business, that's so lovely. And any time that I did speak to people like that about it, they were very condescending and judgmental. So yeah, I just smiled and thought, oh, but I am just not here. So yes, there's a lot of us little handmade sellers with our little businesses, and we're perceived as not being very ambitious, when in fact we're very ambitious. It just looks very different. We might prioritize time, flexibility of time, over revenue. The amount that we want to make in our handmade business might be very small in comparison to what we were making in our corporate jobs, but that doesn't mean that we're failing. It doesn't mean that we're not successful. It doesn't mean that we're not ambitious. It just looks different. What we want is different, and you've heard that phrase, if you want different, you have to do different. I've said that time and the flexibility of time was the most important driving factor for me, and I had that and smaller income. And of course my daughter was very young, so the time aspect was bigger. And as she's grown older and needed me slightly less and become slightly more independent, the time factor has become slightly smaller in necessity. And as a result, I've also noticed that my income has risen a little bit. That's another thing that I love so much about running a handmade business, is that it's so much easier to adapt my business around my life and around the things that matter, and they constantly evolve. So as they evolve, my business can evolve with me. And it never ceases to amaze me how other people who know nothing about my business, they know nothing about my business goals, let alone whether or not I'm hitting them, will look at the small amount that they can see online and make a sweeping judgment. Yeah, anybody who thinks that running a YouTube channel as part of their business is easy hasn't been paying attention. I mean, I even have a Patreon group and we all get together and we're trying to help each other build our YouTube channels because it's graft. I know that there are some people that think I just sit in front of a camera, switch it on, and away I go. Don't let the scrappiness fool you. There is thought that goes into it. You see? Here, I've got a little camera that sits behind me, and it shines a light on that, because in the editing process, when I lift the shadow, it just makes this look brighter. You won't know that because you don't see it, but it happens. Even in the scrappy level videos that you see, there's a lot of work that goes into it. Anyway, digressing again, let's get back to it. My point is that there are a number of reasons why people choose to run a handmade business, and it's usually because they are not getting what they need from a corporate environment. It could be around their health, it could be to do with family. It might be that someone has retired or part retired and they just want another income stream, not a huge one to pay everything, but just something to boost I can't think of the word that I'm looking for, but basically even pension payments these days, you can't always rely on them. So something to just give you a little bit of a boost, and that might be your goal. That doesn't mean that that person is any less ambitious or works any less hard. It just means that what they want from their business, their goals and what their metrics for success are, they're going to be different from someone who works a 9 to 5 in corporate. The whole process. Marketing is different. The way you run your business is different. The way you speak to your community is different. That's different. I mean, I would never, in a corporate role, consider customers or clients to be a community. That is just not a thing. Whereas when you're running a handmade business, it's more organic. I mean, you can't, even if you're very I can't imagine why anybody would be anti-community, but let's just pretend that you are and you're like, ugh, I don't want a community. I don't understand how you can make products or make videos or do anything like this and not come away knowing a little bit about your customers or your audience, or whatever word you want to use. You'll start to see people popping up that you recognize. You'll start to see the same faces, the same names, and before you know it, you will catch feelings and you will start to look forward to certain people, and you will start to feel good when you see them pop up, and it will give you the warm and fuzzies, and before you know it, you've got a community. But you get my point. You can't avoid it. It's just, it's not something that you can make. I've seen people try it, and the moment you try and make it or you try and force something, it doesn't work. It has to grow organically, darling. Sorry, I start to sound a bit pretentious and wanky when I start talking about that, but hopefully you get my point. It is organic, and it's a very different thing. You don't get that in corporate business, and I love it. It's one of the reasons why I do this, because it feels good, whereas the alternative never did. I mean, working for myself, even my working rhythm is different. I mean, the only thing that looks the same day in, day out is the kind of life admin that I get done in the mornings before I start my working day. And I never look at the clock. It doesn't matter what time I start. I start when the life admin bit is done, and then I'm working. And that's it. And I've fallen into the habit of doing video stuff in the morning, because that's when you get the best of my energy, whether that be low or high. And then in the afternoons, that'll be when I switch to the actual making part of my business, or the writing and the planning future videos, because that's just how my energy is working at the moment. But it's in a constant state of flux. You can't do that in a corporate job. You have set things that you have to do, sometimes on certain days and certain parts of the days, and regardless of what your energy levels are doing, you have to do it. And it doesn't feel good. I actually am more productive and get more work done this way than I ever did in the corporate world. Corporate business does not mean a better business. It does not mean more productivity. It does not mean that people are working harder. It does not even mean more revenue in some cases. Also, with a handmade business, I just have full control over everything within my business. The moment that clicked in my brain. The moment I was able to go, oh, I don't have to keep applying what I learned in the corporate world to my handmade business because it doesn't translate, it doesn't work. The moment I was able to put that down and really just make up my own bloody rules, that was when my handmade business changed immediately. Here's to doing things different. Cheers.